We're kind of in two seasons at once this morning. We're in Advent, but also we don't have a service on Christmas Day itself, usually, and our Christmas service doesn't have a sermon in it, so on this fourth Sunday of Advent, you are also getting a Christmas sermon. And what I'm going to do this morning is bring together the Christmas story with one of my favorite Christmas poems. And if the poem sounds familiar when I read it, it's because I read it last year during the Christmas Eve service, and it didn't really work. But rather than thinking, oh, maybe I'm the only one who likes this poem, maybe I shouldn't impose it on everybody else, rather than thinking that, I thought, maybe I should talk about it more. So here we go. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to read the poem, then we're going to talk about the Christmas story, then I'm going to read the poem again. So it's a bit of a sandwich. The poem is called Star Silver. It's written by Carl Sandburg, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning American poet. Star Silver. The silver of one star plays cross lights against pine green. And the play of this silver crosswise against the green is an old story, thousands of years. And sheep raisers on the hills by night, watching the woolly four-footed ramblers, watching a single silver star. Why does this story never wear out? And a baby, slung in a feed box, back in a barn in a Bethlehem slum. A baby's first cry, mixing with the crunch of a mule's teeth on Bethlehem Christmas corn. Baby fists, softer than snowflakes of Norway. The vagabond mother of Christ and the vagabond men of wisdom, all in a barn on a winter's night. And a baby there, in swaddling clothes, on hay. Why does this story never wear out? The sheen of it all is a star silver and a pine green for the heart of a child, asking a story. The red and hungry, red and hankering heart calling for cross lights of silver and green. Okay, we'll come back to that. For the time being, just let that poem sink down into your subconscious and do some good work in the background, except for the poem's question. Why does this story never wear out? Hold on to that. And with that question in mind, we'll turn to the Christmas story. But first, I want to make a bit of a disclaimer for when I say the Christmas story. The truth is that our Christmas story comes from two places, Matthew and Luke. Only those two Gospels have what scholars call the infancy narratives. Why can't they say Christmas story? The other two Gospels start with Jesus already grown up. But the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke are, in fact, very different. And those differences can drive our modern minds a little bit crazy with our intense and unwavering focus on chronology and logical consistency. But the problem is resolved a little bit when you remember that Matthew and Luke were not modern people. They didn't share our obsessions. They were thoroughly grounded in their culture, in first century thought and first century practice. They each had a different agenda when they put their Gospels together. They had a different intended audience, each of them, a different emphasis. So their infancy narratives are very different. Nevertheless, we modern people have taken aspects from both those Gospels and tried to put them together in one flowing story. And it's probably not the best practice to do that. So here comes the disclaimer. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to talk about the Christmas story as if there's just one, in part because that's how we often experience the story, and in part because this morning's poem does that too. So we'll just keep that in mind as we proceed, and as always, feel free, very free, to veto this morning's sermon in your own mind if this kind of academic sloppiness that I'm embracing this morning is just too much for you. And it is important to say, as often as we can, that even at Christmas time, disagreement with what someone says from a pulpit is not a sign of rebellion or weakness or lack of faith. Disagreement with what someone says in a pulpit is a sign of engagement. So please feel free. Why does this story never wear out? Well, one of the great things about the Christmas story is that it is so cozy and cute. Parents know how much easier Christmas is to navigate than Easter. Good Friday. But the Christmas story is a wonderful story to tell children, and it's a wonderful story to let children tell us, as countless Christmas pageants can attest. What do we have that's cozy and cute? We have a pregnant Mary riding on a donkey with Joseph walking alongside, being very caring. We have shepherds watching their sheep by night, angels suddenly appearing and singing, and wise men bringing presents. We have a stable filled with animals, perfectly designed for thousands and thousands of Christmas picture books. We have a manger, and we have, very confidently we say, we have swaddling clothes, which we do like to say, even though we don't really know what it means. And of course, we have a baby. A baby, what could be cuter than that? So, the Christmas story is cozy and cute. But I don't think that's the reason this story never wears out. Because repetitions of cozy and cute only last so long in a person's life. The poem, notice, does not ask, why do children like this story? The poem asks, why does this story never wear out? And that's different. So here's one angle. When you look at the Christmas story more closely, you realize pretty soon that there are a lot of elements in the story that are definitely not cozy or cute. Let's explore those. Well, the Christmas story begins, of course, with a pregnancy. And this is a whopper of a pregnancy. This is a pregnancy that's very difficult to explain. Can you imagine being something like a 15-year-old girl and saying this to your parents? Guess what? I'm pregnant when I'm not supposed to be. But it's okay because God is the Father. Try that sometime. Or if you don't want to say that to your parents, try saying it to your fiancé. How would that go? So, pretty soon, cozy and cute fly right out the window. We're told that Joseph, being a righteous man, decides to divorce Mary quietly to save her from public disgrace. Notice something. The question is not whether or not to divorce her. The question is just how. So cute. Divorce. And you can't really blame Joseph. From his perfectly reasonable perspective, Mary is either delusional or the world's most pathetic liar. That's the story you came up with? That's what you come up with? This is how you're explaining it, God? In either case, Mary is clearly not someone that you want to attach yourself to for the rest of your life. So you divorce her. And just so you know, the Jewish custom of marriage at that time was a two-step process. And the first step was an engagement. It lasted about a year, after which time the couple would move in together and, as scholars say, consummate the marriage, which is just fancy talk for having sex. These scholars must have an amazing romantic life. But unlike our practice, it was the engagement that marked the legally binding relationship between two people. So unlike with us, breaking off an engagement for them required a divorce. We just say, here's your ring back, sorry. So this is what Joseph is going to do, but then he has a dream and he's told not to divorce Mary, so he doesn't. And he speeds up the normal timeline and brings Mary immediately into his home. However, we're told he does not consummate the marriage until after Jesus is born. So what do we have? We have a potentially embarrassing pregnancy in the midst of a sexless marriage, in the midst of a small, gossipy village. Cozy. So this good news, as we call it, from the angel Gabriel to Mary is actually genuinely unsettling and disturbing news for her. Mary's life was going along just fine. She was engaged to a good and a gentle man, a carpenter, and in a year's time or less, she would move in with him and they would start their new life together. But now, she's in a really awkward situation and she's got nobody to talk to about it, at least not comfortably. So then we get what I think of as the world's first Christmas present, and it's a very practical gift. The angel Gabriel gives Mary someone to talk to by telling her that Elizabeth, her cousin, is also experiencing a miraculous and impossible pregnancy. So Mary travels to Elizabeth's home, well, more accurately, since we're talking about the first century, Zechariah's home. But Zechariah isn't available right now. He's not talking right now. Could I take a message and get him to phone you back in many months? It's not because he doesn't want to talk, it's because he can't. The angel Gabriel had a nice conversation with Mary, but not with Zechariah. Not with the man who was a priest, who was serving in the temple, which is kind of where you might expect to have an encounter with God. But Zechariah was not open. So the angel strikes him dumb, and while Zechariah sits about silently in what is supposed to be his home, the two women, Mary and Elizabeth, are busy talking and delighting in each other and proclaiming the good news and singing and generally just praising God. In other words, the stuff male priests are supposed to be doing. And then my point is that the story has become complicated. It's not just a thin layer of cozy and cute. There's discomfort, there's lack of faith, and there's even social commentary on the hierarchies that we human beings always seem to build into our societies. And then zip forward really fast and we get to the end of this awkward pregnancy. Mary and Joseph have to travel to Bethlehem for some governmental bureaucratic reason. Traveling while very pregnant is not fun. Especially, I'm told, on a donkey. Hear this all the time. At least I'm not on a donkey. Nor, back then, was it actually safe to be traveling distances. And then when they arrive in Bethlehem, of all things, they can't find shelter. There's no room, and Mary is basically in labor or very close to it. So panic, I think, would be a perfectly understandable response in that situation. And somehow in the midst of all that, they find something approaching lodging. It's shelter, at least. They move in with animals in an outbuilding or possibly a little cave of some sort. And when the baby is born, they have to use the feed box as their crib. Just so you know, that's not ideal. And 40 days later, when Mary and Joseph present Jesus at the temple, Luke tells us they offer up 2 young pigeons as their offering, which shows us, actually, that they couldn't afford the lamb that you're supposed to give. The 2 pigeons were an option if you were poor. Mary and Joseph were poor. So all this difficult pregnancy and birth and travel and homelessness is now combined with poverty. Plus, while they're at the temple, they hear some pretty unsettling and disturbing things, including this from old Simeon to Mary. This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. And then this. And if you've ever been through this journey of having an infant, at 40 days, you're not at your best. And Simeon says, "And a sword will pierce your own soul too, Mary." Cozy. Cute. Meanwhile, the so-called wise men aren't really as wise as we might wish, because they go straight to King Herod, a power-hungry and paranoid ruler, and they ask him, "Where's the next king that's just been born?" "First I heard of it," says Herod. "Let me get back to you." And he consults with the religious experts who tell him it must be Bethlehem, and he sends the wise men to Bethlehem with instructions to let him know just as soon as they find the next king. They do find Jesus, and they bring gifts, as we know. And it seems like they were going to return to Herod and just tell him Jesus' location, until in a dream they are instructed to avoid King Herod, and they go back home another way. Herod realizes he's been duped, and he goes berserk in the literal sense of that word, trying to kill all the Hebrew baby boys in that region under a certain age, just to get rid of any future competition for the throne. This is not cute. This is not cozy. But Jesus escapes with his family because Joseph was warned in a dream. So they flee to Egypt for a while, and after King Herod dies, they're instructed in yet another dream that it's safe to go back home. When you think about all of this that I've just described, all of this hardship, all of this messiness, you begin to understand why the angels have to keep saying over and over and over again, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." And it doesn't really work. I think it's easy to say that if you're an angel. It's harder to obey it when you're a human in the midst. All of this stuff is in the Christmas story along with the cute and cozy stuff. It's all in there. And I think that is an important reason why this story never wears out. Because this story, in all of its difficulty and awkwardness and discomfort, this story shows us something very, very important. It shows us love in the midst of messiness. In the midst of messiness, not love after you get that messiness cleaned up and fixed. And we need to hear that, because we too, thousands of years later, live in the midst of messiness every day. Every single one of us in this room can list elements in our lives from the past week that are not cozy and cute. Forget the past week, past 24 hours, or perhaps just this morning. Wink, wink. What I'm calling messiness this morning inhabits our lives. Christianity, just so you know, has long affirmed this. There is a well-known Christian prayer. It's at least 700 years old. It's probably been used every day on the planet for the past 700 years. That says this: "In the midst of life, we are in death. Where else can we turn for comfort but to God, who is holy and mighty and merciful?" I just heard that prayer yesterday at the funeral of a wonderful, amazing 95-year-old woman who was solving crossword puzzles and making sarcastic remarks, even in what she knew to be her final hours. But even her privileged life, and it was, her father-in-law was in the British cabinet at the outbreak of World War II, working and debating with people like Neville Chamberlain and Winston Churchill. Even her privileged life was filled with all the messiness, all the awkwardness and the discomfort and the heartache that the rest of us commoners experience. So even for her, in the midst of life, we are in death. Where else can we turn for comfort but to God, who is holy and mighty and merciful? And in the Christmas story, we see all of those elements. We see love made flesh and beginning to dwell among us, but dwelling among us in the messiness, in the awkward and embarrassing pregnancy, the difficulty of Mary and Joseph's relationship, the muteness of Zechariah amongst the raucous singing of the women in his home, the travel and homelessness at the end of Mary's pregnancy, the birth in an animal shed, the poverty, the warning about a sword piercing Mary's heart, the unwise wise men, and the violent King Herod, the threat to Jesus' life, the long trip to Egypt and back, and after all of that, what had to be a whole village full of gossip. In the midst of it all, dwelling in all of it, here comes Emmanuel, God with us, in the midst. Real love. So, love in the midst of messiness, that's one reason why I think this story never wears out. Because the Christmas story works for us when we're children and unaware of a lot of life's challenging layers. But then the Christmas story keeps working for us as we grow up. And as we become aware of life's challenging layers, we can also become aware of the challenging layers in that story. What we see in the Christmas story is both miraculous and familiar. And then, if we take one really big step back from the Christmas story as adults, we become increasingly aware that the Christmas story doesn't come to us in a vacuum. It's not alone. Christians affirm that the story of Jesus is the fulfillment of the entire messy Old Testament story. And we understand that the story that begins in swaddling clothes in a manger continues on through a difficult ministry and confused disciples to the cross. And none of that is particularly cute, especially the cross. Not cute, not cozy. And at this point, as we're starting to come in for a landing here, I'm going to start talking in a way that on purpose foreshadows the poem that I will read again to end the sermon. At the cross, we see the intersection of heaven and earth. Rosemary read about that in her prayer. The silver light of heaven meets the green light of life on earth, and these two lights meet crosswise. And that meeting at the cross is an old story, thousands of years. It's like a play, thousands of years long, a play of the story showing us cross lights of silver and green, of heaven and earth. But before the cross, of course, we have the birth. And already in the Christmas story, we see something important about God, who is almighty and all-powerful. This might seem strange, but we see in the Christmas story what the fists of God look like. They do not look like the hands of some cosmic warrior. They look like baby fists, softer than snowflakes of Norway. There is so much delicious paradox in the Christmas story. As G.K. Chesterton wrote in yet another Christmas poem, the Christmas story takes us to the end of the way of the wandering star, to the things that cannot be and are, to the place where God was homeless and where all people are at home. Jesus said that in order to fully understand the kingdom of God, we need to approach it like children. Well, children, this is just one aspect, but children understand that they are, in many ways, powerless. Others in their lives wield the power and the influence. Others shape their lives. Children know what it is to be frustrated, to have unmet goals. But children also instinctively understand the importance and the value of story. They have red and hungry, red and hankering hearts for a story that makes sense of their joys and their hopes and their frustrations. In other words, children hanker for the story of love in the midst of messiness. The Christmas story never wears out because when we open up our hearts, we too, like children, have red and hungry, red and hankering hearts, calling for cross lights of silver and green. So here's the poem again. The silver of one star plays cross lights against pine green. And the play of this silver crosswise against the green is an old story, thousands of years. And sheep raisers on the hills by night, watching the woolly four-footed ramblers, watching a single silver star. Why does this story never wear out? And a baby, slung in a feed box, back in a barn in a Bethlehem slum. A baby's first cry, mixing with the crunch of a mule's teeth on Bethlehem Christmas corn. Baby fists, softer than snowflakes of Norway. The vagabond mother of Christ and the vagabond man of wisdom, all in a barn on a winter's night. And a baby there, in swaddling clothes, on hay. Why does this story never wear out? The sheen of it all is a star silver and a pine green for the heart of a child, asking a story. The red and hungry, red and hankering heart calling for cross lights of silver and green. Amen.